Chapter 1. Gladys Hungerton.
I often listened to Mr. Hungerton. He talked to me about economics. It was very boring, but I was in love with his daughter, Gladys. One evening, I listened to him for a long time. Finally, he left. I now had a chance to speak to Gladys. She was a proud woman, and she treated me as a friend. She looked at me and said,
"You're going to propose marriage."
"How do you know?" I replied.
A woman always knows. But Edward, I don't love you. I love somebody else,
she continued. "Who?" I cried.
Nobody really. I love the idea of someone. I want to love a hero, somebody like the great explorers Richard Burton and Lord Stanley, a man who has nearly seen death, a great hero. When I marry, I want to marry a great man.
"Then I'll do something great for you," I replied.
When you do come back, we can talk about marriage then,
she said. I left her and went to work. I was a journalist, and I had to work that evening. When I arrived at the offices of the newspaper Daily Gazette, I went to see my boss, the news editor, Mr. McArdle.
"You're doing a very good job,"
he said when he saw me. Thank you very much, sir," I replied. "I want to ask you a favour."
"What is it?"
"Could you possibly send me on a mission for the paper? Then I could write some good articles for you."
"What kind of mission, Mr. Malone?"
"Well, anything with adventure and danger."
"Do you really want to die so young?"
"No, I want to do something heroic with my life," I said.
"Well, the age of exploration and romance is over. No, wait. I have an idea. What about exposing a fraud? You could show that he's a liar. Do you like that idea?"
"Yes, anything is good," I replied.
"Well,"
continued Mr. McArdle,
"I'm sure that you can talk to this man. You're good at making friends with people."
"Thank you, sir," I said.
"So, try to talk to Professor Challenger."
"Challenger?" I cried. "Professor Challenger, the famous zoologist? The man who attacked Blundell, the journalist of the Telegraph?"
"Well,"
said Mr. McArdle,
"you said that you wanted adventure."
Yes, I do," I answered. "But what exactly has Professor Challenger done?"
"He went to South America on an expedition 2 years ago,"
he answered excitedly.
"He came back last year. He certainly went to South America, but he doesn't want to say where exactly. He started to tell everyone about his adventures. However, when people ask him questions, he never replies. Something wonderful happened. Oh, the man is a very good liar. He has some photographs in bad condition, but scientists say that they are fakes. When journalists try to talk to him, he just throws them down the stairs. Well, Mr. Malone, this is your mission. Goodbye."
My meeting was over. Now I had to make a plan to meet Professor Challenger. I knew that he hated journalists. I decided to write him a letter saying I was interested in science. This is the letter that I wrote. "Dear Professor Challenger, I am only a student of nature and science, but I am very interested in your ideas on the debate between the scientists August Weismann and Charles Darwin. I would very much like to discuss some of your ideas. I believe you are the real expert on this matter. I have many questions to ask you about this fascinating subject. Please, could I visit you at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning? Yours respectfully, Edward D. Malone."
Chapter 2. Professor Challenger.
Later, I received a letter from Professor Challenger.
Dear Sir, I received your letter. You can come to my house. However, I am a great scientist, and I do not need your good opinion of me. Show this letter to my servant when you arrive. I do not want any of those horrible journalists in my house. Yours faithfully, George Edward Challenger.
The next day I went to his house. A servant opened the door.
Is Professor Challenger expecting you?
He asked. Yes, he is, I answered.
Have you got the letter?
He continued. I showed the letter to his servant and walked in. A small woman stopped me. She looked more French than English to me.
Do you already know my husband?
She asked. No, I don't, I answered.
Well, then I must apologize for him now. He's a perfectly impossible person. Do not argue with him. He can be dangerous. Do you want to talk about South America?
Yes, madam, I answered, because I could not lie to a lady.
Oh, that's a very dangerous subject. Just say that you agree with him. Call me if he seems dangerous. I can usually control him.
The servant then led me into Professor Challenger's study. I was surprised when I saw him. He had a very large head and a big black beard. His chest and arms were enormous.
Well?
He said. I am the student who wanted to ask you some questions about Weizmann and Darwin, I said. Perhaps your opinion of Weizmann was too critical, I continued, and recent experiments show that maybe he's right.
Well,
he said seriously.
You know that the cranial index is a constant factor.
Naturally, I answered, but I did not understand anything.
And that germplasm is different from the parthenogenetic egg.
Oh, yes, I cried, and I was surprised at my courage.
But what does this show?
He concluded. I don't know. What does this show?
It shows,
he said in a loud voice,
that you're one of those horrible journalists and that you're not a young scientist. I talked nonsense to you. My words had no real meaning.
He stood up, and I was surprised because he was extremely short. He began to walk in my direction. You mustn't attack me, I said.
But I will,
he answered. He attacked me, and in a second we went quickly out of the front door into the street. Fortunately, just then a policeman arrived and said,
What's happening?
This man attacked me, I said.
Do you want me to arrest him?
He asked. No, I replied. I was wrong too. The policeman walked away. The professor looked at me and smiled a little.
Come in,
he said.
I want to tell you something more.
We entered his house again. Mrs. Challenger was extremely angry.
You're terrible. You're not a famous professor at a great university because you always attack people,
she shouted. The professor grabbed his wife and put her on top of a pillar.
Put me down,
she shouted.
Say please,
he answered.
No, put me down now,
she continued.
No, say please,
he said again.
Please, please, please,
she shouted. Then the professor took her down and gave her a big kiss. After this, the professor and I returned to his study.
I'm going to talk to you about South America,
he said.
2 years ago, I went on a journey to South America. I went to the Amazon to check some observations of the scientists Wallace and Bates. During my stay in the Amazon, I became a friend of the Cucama Indians. They told me that there was a sick man that needed help. But before I arrived, the man died. I was surprised, however, when I saw him. He was a white man, not an Indian. His name was Maple White, and he was from the United States. He was an artist. Here are some of his pictures.
I looked at them. Some were of the Indians, and others were of different animals like turtles and alligators. Well, I said, these don't seem very unusual.
Look at the next one,
he said. It was a picture of a cliff with a thin, high tower of rock in front of it. I don't know anything about rocks, I said.
Well, try the next picture then,
he said. The next one was of a man next to a huge and very strange lizard.
Why did he draw this?
The professor asked. I don't know. Perhaps he drank too much gin, I answered.
Or perhaps he really saw this creature,
he said. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't want to fight with him again.
Anyway,
He continued.
the Indians took me to the cliffs in Maple White's drawings. I took some photographs. Most of them got wet during my journey home. Here is one that you can still see. Look.
I looked carefully at the photograph. It was not in very good condition.
What do you see?
He asked. I see the same cliffs and the rock tower of the drawing, I answered.
Yes, of course. But what do you see on the top of the rock tower?
I can see a tree.
And on top of the tree?
A large bird,
It's not a bird at all.
he concluded.
And I shot it.
He then pulled a wing out of a drawer. Is that the wing of a gigantic bat? I asked.
No,
He answered.
it's the wing of a pterodactyl. Look at this book.
He then showed me an illustration in a book that compared the wings of birds, bats, and pterodactyls. This is incredible, I cried, because now I really believed him. How is it possible?
It seems that a volcanic action pushed up a huge area of rock millions of years ago. This area was protected, and so the animals on this plateau continued to live. They never changed, and they're still there today.
Why don't you tell other scientists about your discoveries?
I told them about them, but they laughed.
He said.
Tonight, there's going to be a lecture at the Zoological Institute Hall on the record of the ages by Mr. Waldron. I'll be there. Come, and you'll see the reaction of other scientists to my discoveries.
I promised to come and left Professor Challenger.